Are we good? If anyone can hear me, can you give me a thumbs up? Ah, that's what we like. Let's try one more time. Am I going to be the best speaker at Big Data London? Hey, there we go. I feel like Britney Spears with this on, actually. Like, I'm not going to dance for you. Nobody wants to see that. Thanks everyone for coming. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, even if you're just all taking the opportunity to get a sit down, because I've been standing now for almost 48 hours and I think I've lost the feeling in my feet. This session is metadata management for the masses. Curate, curate, curate. You'll notice that I have Collibra in the top hand corner. I am from Collibra. I am a solution engineer for Collibra. Am I going to tell you about all the amazing things that Collibra can do as a vendor? Not so much. Some of the slides that I will use Collibra pictures, largely because I have access to Collibra, unsurprisingly. However, a lot of the principles are generally going to be applicable whatever technology you're using, so I'm sure all of the vendors out there will be happy to hear that. My name is Unwin. I am a solution engineer, like I said. I am severely lacking in friends because all I know how to do in my personal life is talk about data governance, so please take pity on me. Add me on LinkedIn, add me on Twitter. Always happy to talk, whether it's a question about governance in general, quality, whether it's a question about Collibra, maybe if you just wanted to know what I had for lunch. It really doesn't matter, feel free to add me. But I do thoroughly enjoy talking, as you can probably already guess, and I like talking about things like cataloging, anonymization, DevOps, governance, quality. That's generally my bag. So what's the goal for today's session? I'm a big fan of a goal. Do we have any football fans in? Yeah? I won't tell you that I'm a Man City fan then, so that would be bad. So the goal for today, to understand what good curation looks like for metadata and how this can minimize time spent finding and trusting data. Or in English, why it's not just enough to have a list of all of your schemas, tables, columns, etc. Because that's not particularly helpful at most companies. So what is this not a session on? Surprise! I am not talking about data mesh, possibly the only person here not talking about data mesh. I'm also here not talking about data fabric, yet another buzzword for us to use, and I'm not talking about data provisioning specifically, virtualization, provisioning. This session is not about these three topics, it is about something different, but will still align with a couple of the principles of some of these things. But mostly I'll be focusing on enrichment of metadata. So of course, for our baseline, we turn to our good friends, the reliable source of Wikipedia. And just to establish a baseline so we all know what I'm talking about when I say metadata, I realize it's a pretty fundamental thing, but it's important. We all start at the same place. Metadata is data that provides information about other data, but not the content of the data itself. Fairly straightforward. Basically, that means if we have a picture of a corgi who you can tell is very impressed by Valentine's Day, that is the data. The metadata is the stuff around it. We've got the info, the views, the downloads, where it's featured, when it was published, information that is relevant, important, helpful, but is not the content of the data itself. I'm generalizing, but this is how we're establishing that baseline. Now, one thing I want to talk about is that the volume of data and information created, captured, copied is obviously on the rise and is predicted by 2025 to hit 181 zettabytes, which is quite a lot of data, if you didn't know. But the amount of data isn't actually the problem. I mean, in some cases, I'm not going to do my best impression from Back to the Future, but 181 zettabytes! It's kind of not the big deal. The big deal, the problem with this data, is how things change. Right? Originally, we might have had a couple of relational databases with all of our stuff in it, and we might do some reporting from that database. But now it's more about picking the appropriate solutions for those use cases. For different areas, different aspects of the business, you will have different demands on the type of data that you hold and collect and drive insight from. And as a result, the location of that data is going to be different. You will have different areas of the business globally. You will have different data sources in different clouds. Is there anyone here whose company just uses one cloud and has no footprint in any other cloud? A couple, but there's a lot of hands not coming up. So it's very common to see this kind of hybrid cloud, multi-cloud approach. And so that makes it difficult to find where everything is. Probably one of the most important things I'll mention today is actually the purpose of data, which surprisingly a lot of people seem to lack, is that we gather a whole bunch of data, but seemingly we can't make ends meet. We can't actually figure out, okay, this is the purpose for that data. This is why we gather it. This is why we use it. This is why you should consume it. Now, I said this wasn't a talk about data mesh, but this is a really good quote, so I'm sure you'll forgive me. So Zhamak Dehghani from ThoughtWorks, you may have been present at the talk yesterday or any of the talks about data mesh, which will have this name associated with it, but a very important thing to think about in terms of how the business generates data, consumes metadata. One of the challenges of existing analytical data architectures is the high friction and cost of discovering, understanding, trusting, and using quality data. And there's a lot of different approaches to making sure that data is findable, trustable, usable, accessible. And a lot of the time we end up with data sprawl. We end up with inaccurate data, duplicate data, stale data, raw data, and it's dotted all around the company in lots of different places. And this is part of the problem, because we may well have a technical catalog of all of our data where it exists, but actually some of it might look the same. Spoiler alert. I borrowed this slide from Collibra because I really, really like it. And the interesting part is this bit here, the usage of data, right? Why do we employ business analysts? Why do we employ report analysts? Why do we employ people in business intelligence? Because they do the value-added stuff that helps drive top-level reporting, management decisions. Hey, we want to deliver this amazing dashboard that makes us go, whoa, we're doing completely the wrong thing. We should be selling X instead. But the problem is the steps that are required to find the right data in the first place are actually significantly more of the process. The worst situation I've heard of is actually having to wait upwards of 2 months to get access to the right data because people are on holiday, because people who grant access to data, have actually left the company and nobody knows who handles that data anymore. It's really, really difficult. And some of the kind of KPIs that certainly many of my customers are working towards are the people who are saying, we want to be able to get from nothing to data in 72 hours with 0 meetings. Which sounds like a pipe dream, but it's definitely achievable. And this is from IDC figures, so we've worked quite closely with the IDC, and they've actually said 60 to 70% of data consumers' time is spent on finding data, not necessarily on using data, which is the important stuff, theoretically. And metadata can help us navigate this problem a little bit further. We know where something is in terms of, okay, we go to Azure. We go to my favorite, Azure SQL. I came from the Microsoft world, don't judge me. And then we know that we're looking for the very flashy table or this useful heap table that should probably have a primary key. And we get things like the system, the location, we get the storage type, the table, the column name, which is useful information. But nobody consumes a catalog, or sorry, not nobody, data engineers, lineage engineers, report engineers, who are very close to the data, might come to your technical data catalog and go, I'm looking for cust_act_num. But 95% of the people in the business will go, I need customer data. So that you will not find your very flashy table by searching for customer data. Because we're missing really important concepts. Classification. Everyone these days is talking about GDPR, CCPA, privacy, the governance that applies to data. Who can access that data? Do we have data sharing agreements in place with third parties? Are we able to share that information? So policy, standards, usage information, right? Definitions, data domains, quality metrics. There's about 600 people here talking to you about data quality. You should know it's kind of important. Again, spoiler alert, but the idea is that we need more information. And this is where we come to the point of this presentation, and that is why it's called metadata management for the masses. Because we need context. Many of you have been to a supermarket. I'm going to safely assume that. Now, if you think about how a supermarket is laid out, the amount of money that goes into figuring out the layout for supermarkets, you wouldn't think it was necessarily that much. Some of you might have insider information. It's a lot, okay? Tons of research papers go into designing how you consume from a supermarket. We have the fruit and veg near the front. Smells good, looks good, good for you. You feel like you're making a healthy choice. Yes, I need those tomatoes. As if you're not going to then consume it with lasagna. But you come in, it looks good, it feels good. Then you go to the back aisles. This is where you can then browse the various meat and fish items, unless you're a preachy vegan like myself, in which case you wouldn't. Then you've got the middle areas, and the middle areas are where people need to come out of the flow of the shop to make hard decisions, because there's about 6.4 million different types of breakfast cereal, so you need to stand there and compare them and look. And then finally, my favorite aisle, the alcohol aisle, where you can find beer and wine. You've been in the shop, but at this point, 50 minutes, an hour, you have no willpower left. So you just reach for the wine. And that's going to help you. And this is most stores you go to, right? This is most shops you go to. I'm sure you can all think of one that has a similar layout. And actually, data is the same. This is why when you talk about a data catalog, we don't just mean a data dictionary, right? When you say data catalog, we think data is the product, not the byproduct. So if you think about data as a breakfast cereal, or in this case, an aubergine. So I'm looking for an aubergine. But you'll notice that on the Tesco website, when I search for aubergine, I get aubergine meze. This is delicious, actually, if you've ever had it. We get the finest Italian red aubergines and aubergine pickle. These are all technically aubergine. Technically. But they are not an aubergine for us to buy. So when we search for data, we might know that we're looking for employee aubergine, because employees are aubergines, but we've got employee human capital information, employee recruiting information, employee statistical information, okay? They are all byproducts of this environment, of this data domain, where we are looking at our employees, and there's lots of different types of employee that we consume. One of them is the right one. And others are not, but other people don't know that. In your business, in many companies I speak to, they find the meze and they consume it and go, that's a beautiful report. But others come along and they go, the numbers don't tally up. Things don't match up because I'm used to using this. And that's where trust falls. Management starts pushing back and saying, no. These two numbers don't match up. So where's the disconnect? And then do they trust your reports moving forward from there? So if the box is blank, if you just have technical metadata, you end up with salt and sugar very close together and a very unpalatable cup of tea if you don't have that information. See, I don't even take sugar in my tea, so I avoid that problem. These two things look the same, but one of them is fit for purpose, complete, high quality, and of course, up to date. And as we know, GDPR perspective, data, we are at a legal obligation to keep data up to date. Fair enough. However, because we have data silos within the organization, and silos aren't a bad thing, okay? Everyone's going to tell you silos are a complete bad thing. They're terrible, awful, bad for business. If you're a business of any size, there are going to be silos, but you need a way of getting to the information in that silo, something that sits over the top. Okay, most silos you see have that little connector going out the top of it. Okay, similar prospects, similar idea. But the problem is we have this second data set which is unsuitable for purpose, limited scope, indeterminate quality, possibly outdated. But because of this silo, because of this issue, they exist in different systems, people have different knowledge surrounding them, it's just generally difficult to consume, we end up using that one for our quote-unquote trusted analytics. So this is an example of Sept. Sept ECC, right, the module. When you go down and you look at Sept ECC, and Sept ECC is great, really good ERP system, but when you go down and you look at the table names and descriptions, A016, ADRV, this is the sales and distribution module of Sept ECC. That's a technical catalog. We have a catalog. Why don't you use it, business user? This gives me the same energy as this very bad book index. Pod book, pod segment. Pod print on. Podcast, podcasts with a capital P. Publishers, publishers, publishers. Publishers, publishers, publishing. It's not exactly helpful, is it? So, this is getting very metadata, isn't it? Metadata management for the masses. Who are the consumers of data at your company? And you might think data engineers. You might think people who actively work on the data. And you would be right. But I tell you what, that's a bit of an iceberg, because management, business analysts, BI analysts, even data scientists, right? Data scientists we shouldn't necessarily expect to go hunting around a database. It just makes no sense. What we want is for them to find the right data quickly. They need the right entry point. And that's why it should be for the masses. So when you're designing a data catalog, think about how the business will use it, not simply dumping your schemas into a metadata swamp. So here's a good example of an asset in Collibra that I think you'll find is not very well curated. There is nothing. Health data for marketing, that's all we've got. Important thing I should point out, a data set in Collibra terms is like a data product. Okay, it's like an entry point, a collection of columns on different tables, different databases, different schemas, whatever, different places. So it's like a consumable entry point. But it's still not very helpful. Because although people can look for health data for marketing, thank you. Although people can look for health data for marketing, they're still not entirely sure. There's still a way to go. Now, I'm going to talk to you about stewards at some point. I'm not saying that every company needs data stewards. It's a good thing. From what I've seen, data stewards do an excellent job, and data owners as well. Having someone with those responsibilities, though, is absolutely crucial to making sure people can consume data correctly. Oh, isn't that better? We have the customer behavior data set. It's approved, it's certified. We have context, like what business terms and data domains apply to it. We have the data elements that comprise this data set, ratings, ownership, we have tags, we get additional context. And that's something that's so consumable, is finding the right view of data, not even at the physical level, but just finding the right view of the representation of data. And this is why metadata is so important. I'll let you all finish taking some photos. It's one of my favorite views as well. Not my favorite view, mind you, of Collibra. There are a couple others. And if you're interested in seeing them, obviously I will be at the Collibra booth. I'm gradually losing my voice though, so please ask very quietly. So, what we need is better metadata for our metadata. I ummed and ahed over this slide and generally thought, should I call it metadata data or metadata, I don't know. But here's my top three, regardless. You'll like the little Inception reference there, if anyone's seen the film. Number one, context, a logical data model. It is not enough to dump your schemas into a catalog, as I have said a couple of times. That's how important it is. We need something that represents, right, this is my favorite view in Collibra, This is something that represents not only that physical data, at the physical data layer that we've ingested, right? Database, schema, table, database, schema, table, because it exists in lots of places. But then we have our marketing, sales, analytics data model in the middle here, okay, with our entity customer. Okay, I'm working with a number of educational establishments at the moment who are saying, well, entity, understandably, is student. Absolutely. And that's important in itself because it needs ownership, it needs curation from an entity level. And we can also see that it relates up to a wider data domain because we might have entities that exist within our product domain or our order domain, but actually they're still separate entities. So it's about creating those meaningful relationships, that context. And these entities have attributes. Okay, we all know that a customer will most likely have an email address. I mean, I don't know, is there anyone in here who doesn't have an email address? Well, we're good, okay, thank God. But the point is we have these attributes, okay, this is the logical data model, the entity, the attributes. A customer will have an address, a customer will have a bank account number, a customer will have education, gender identity, job title, marital status, email address. And some of this data you might not need to collect, okay? Or you might not have reasonable purpose to collect. So we don't model that. But the stuff that we do need to gather, those are represented as attributes as part of their entity and are therefore mapped to the physical layer. So we know, okay, this is where that data resides. Now, many of you may have tried to classify columns on tables before as part of a data protection initiative. Absolutely. But I tell you what, when you've got 1 million or more columns, it's very difficult to do. Very mind-numbing, one might say. I've done it. It is rubbish. But if you can start saying, well, these data entities, these data attributes exist in these systems, these databases, you've already done your first run of show me everywhere where sensitive data exists. And then you don't need to go column by column immediately, but you've got enough to start establishing a basis, right? Establishing the answer to the question when someone, the DPO, comes to you and says, where's all of our customer data? Because one of our competitors has just had a data breach and I'm a little bit concerned. Or similar questions. And that's why it's important to abstract. So I was talking to you about data sets. That's why it's important to show where those data sets can be implemented. As a reminder, these slides will also be distributed as well. So if you miss a picture, or you want to revisit them, or you need the picture of that corgi in your life, they will be distributed. Or you can just let me know and I'll give them to you. And some things that describe our data. So this is an important point of context, the data set, where it's implemented, but also what processes it's consumed by. It's important to have a center of gravity for your data. As you can tell, description and descriptive examples. Some might argue that's context. In fact, some of my colleagues did, and it made me very unhappy. However, I would argue they're kind of in a whole different section of their own. Description, customer data, data about our customers gives me the same energy as my Git commits, right? This is from XKCD. More code. Here, have code. My hands are typing words. Hands. Don't describe something as what it is. Describe something as the why, the how, the wherefores, right? The important questions about data. Aggregated internet sales information with relevant customer and product data used for consumer behavior analysis. Perfect. Happy with that. A process, anonymization, a process by which personally identifiable information is irreversibly shared in such a way, or irreversibly altered in such a way, a PII principle can no longer be, can no longer be identified. Okay, important to really define things because you establish a common language around data. Quality is an important one as well, and actually you can't really do metadata management without looking at the quality of the underlying data itself, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but it's very important because that's how we make decisions. And as we know, data quality is very hot right now. There's a lot of people talking about why it's important to look at your data quality. It absolutely is. because it indicates if data is fit for use, which better informs consuming the metadata. This is a really, really nice blog post. Again, not sharing because it's Collibra, but because it speaks to observability with data quality. Again, the slides will be distributed. Really good blog post. I would highly recommend it. Anchor is an absolute legend. And that's the problem, because one bad data point ends up moving into our pipeline, whether it's a broken ETL process or manual intervention, and we fix this one. We fix the last one, or set up an automated process to fix the quality in the last one. But if you've still got bad data flowing through, it's not just infecting that one point that you've managed to find and fix. It's about observing the entire pipeline and using quality to identify the quality of that metadata at every point in your pipeline. So you can see how that relates to the data set itself, okay? Set of data, set of columns, they're all reasonably good quality, except we've got an issue with consistency, so we might want to start by looking at that. Bonus round, in the last couple of minutes, I said 3 things. Is there anything glaringly obvious that I missed? Anyone? I've said it about 3 times so far. I'm glad you're all listening. Synergy. Hang on. There it is. Ownership and responsibility. That's better. Ownership and responsibility is, in my opinion, the single most important thing about metadata. Because you need the right people to have the right input about data. And it doesn't mean like one person responsible for all of marketing. It means having the right custodian, having a steward, having owners, maybe having subject matter experts, having people who can chime in to answer questions so that you're not always waiting for the same person over and over and over again who's flooded with all of these requests about data. You know, we end up with a lot of different processes that have kicked off, questions about data, issues with our data, and this just builds up, and one person can't handle it all. Now, I said I wasn't going to talk about data mesh or data fabric, but one thing I really like is the federated model of responsibility, democratizing responsibility for data down within the company, and having a respective ownership model for data. You know, good search reduces horizontal friction, but federation reduces vertical friction. It stops it going up to someone who should not fundamentally be involved in changing the description of a procurement business term. There is no point having the head steward involved in that. Because otherwise you end up with this. And this is my favorite slide on the whole deck. You're welcome to it. I absolutely love it. Because this is why good governance is good, why good metadata curation is good, why DevOps is good, why all of these initiatives that people are working to at the moment, data mesh, data fabric, DevOps, data governance, data privacy, data quality, it all builds into data intelligence, and data intelligence unblocks that bottleneck fundamentally. But you can't just have a technical catalog, full stop. Right? A technical catalog will not get you where you need to go. You need to enrich it. You need to have ownership, quality, context. So when you're thinking about, oh, we maybe need a catalog moving forwards for the whole company, for even a section of the company, don't just dump your schemas in a metadata swamp. Now, if you've got questions, there's my email, my Twitter handle, my LinkedIn, our website, which I'm sure you could probably easily Google. And you can also come and see us at booth 420. There's a fair number of us. We're all very friendly people, except me, I'm an ogre. But if you do have any questions, happy to take them there. Thank you so much for your time. Whoop.